We'll start with a universal precaution. Normally, I would have liked it to, like to do this like in a physical form and ask you a lot of questions, but this time you all are saved. So universal precaution per se is not it's not the correct term. The correct term should be standard precaution, because universal precaution came, when we only knew hepatitis B and HIV, and we sort of made this thing keeping in mind that we have to take care when we are dealing with blood and blood products, and maybe few body fluids like CSF and amniotic fluid. It did not cover a lot of other things which were later included in body substance isolation. So body substance isolation meant that you take universal precautions for stool, vomiters, saliva, sweat, and all that. So we put them together, universal precaution and body substance isolation. So the better term is standard precaution, and they are meant to reduce the risk of transmission of pathogens from both recognized and unrecognized sources. Okay, so following is what I'll be covering today in brief, because I only have 30 minutes. So hand hygiene, use of PPE according to the risk, cough etiquettes, handling of sharps, managing blood spills, and biomedical waste. So why hand hygiene? All of us know that hands carry so many pathogens, and us being in hospital and in healthcare setting, we carry even the resistant isolates and everything. This COVID-19 I've pasted on top because I couldn't get a picture with COVID-19 on the hand. So this is just to show. This is the picture of the hand culture of a healthcare worker after his ICU shift. So if we don't do hand hygiene, this is what happens at the end of the shift. So much of bacteria we pick up and we keep transferring from one patient to another. And that's why hand hygiene is a must. So hand wash or hand rub. Now, as per WHO, for all clinical situation, use of hand rub is preferred if available, except when hands are visibly soiled. So it's a good idea to carry hand rub in your pocket. Now, I think with COVID being here, all of us are doing that. But even otherwise, it's a good idea to just carry hand rub and use that. Now, what exactly does a hand rub contain? We all know it contains alcohol, but how much alcohol? So it must have more than 60% of alcohol, and preferably some emollient too, so that when you repeatedly use a hand rub, your hands don't dry and the skin doesn't crack. Because if the skin is cracked in the palms, then a lot of bacteria and other, germs can sort of get in those cracks and colonize. So it's a good idea to have a good quality hand rub with minimum 60% alcohol and emollients. Now, there are certain conditions where hand wash is a must. Like I said, in the WHO recommendation, when your hands are visibly soiled, when there's some blood or body fluids, or after using toilet and before and after eating, that's when hand wash is preferred. Otherwise, hand rub is a good enough condition. Now, the steps of hand wash or hand rub, they are nearly the same. So if we have to go through the steps of hand rub, so we take a little bit of hand rub on the palm, and we first do palm to palm, then the back of one hand over the other, then it's interlacing fingers, then it's the back of the fingers, then thumb, nails, and lastly the wrist. So by the time you perform these steps, it takes about 30 to 40 seconds, and that's the time which is required for hand rub to completely dry also. And also keep in mind that not wear any jewelry in hands and arms, and also your sleeves should be folded till elbow. It's naked below elbow, it's called. Okay, now coming on to the second part, which is very important, especially with COVID being around, transmission-based precaution. So based on how an infection is transmitted, you take precautions accordingly to avoid getting infection and avoid transmitting infection. So the easiest is the contact precaution for all those infections which are transmitted through contact. For example, all your multi-resistant bugs like MRSA or VRE, they're transmitted by contact. So while taking care of any open wound, this is what you need. You need to have a gown, gloves, and make sure that you don't come in contact with the patient's environment also, like bed railing or medical equipment. You try avoid touching all these things. So these are contact precautions. Now, the biggest doubt comes when an infection is transmitted via droplet or whether it's airborne. Now, these two terms, droplet and airborne, they've caused a lot of confusion in last 7-8 months since COVID came. But they are pretty distinct, and it's not very difficult to understand them. Droplet is a particle which is generally considered to be more than 5 micron in size. So, because they are big in size, they would obviously, due to their weight, settle down on the floor earlier, and they would not remain suspended in the air for a long time. So any infection which is transmitted by droplet, if you are in close proximity of patients, say about 6 feet or 2 meter, if you maintain that much of distance, then when the patient is talking, coughing, or sneezing, whatever droplets are being produced, they will settle down on the floor and they will not reach you. So that is the droplet. There are a lot of procedures. There are a lot of medical procedures which can also produce, droplets like aerosols. And again, the same precaution has to be taken. So the infections which are known to be transmitted by droplet are flu and SARS. And of course, we all know that. And a lot of you have done COVID hospital postings, and you are all aware of that because of this droplet infection, to avoid this only, we all try and, wear the kind of PPE which is required. I'll be talking about it. Coming on to airborne. Now, airborne is a situation where it's a dried sort of dust particle which is suspended in the air and it's carrying the pathogen. Now, these remain in the air for a long time and they can travel a long distance. So, but for any infection to be able to be transmitted, by airborne, that pathogen has to survive dry conditions for and being outside body for a long time, because there is no moisture in that dust particle. So fortunately, there are very few infections which are sort of generally airborne. Tuberculosis is one of them. And there are certain infections like chickenpox and measles, which are like both droplet and airborne. For COVID, as per current sort of evidence that is available, airborne transmission is also reported, is possible. So it's both droplet and airborne. Now, why we need to do this? Because accordingly, we will take the precautions. For droplet precaution, surgical mask within 3 feet of patient, because that's when the droplets would be maximum, and after that they sort of keep suspending down on the floor. For airborne infection, a particulate respirator, and we will talk about respirator in detail in a while. So just coming on to PPE, as some of you would have like done COVID hospital duty, you are aware of the complete PPE. So various components of PPE are apron or gown. Even the routine apron that we wear, it protects our clothes and skin. Gloves, whenever we are going to be in touch with blood, body fluids, non-intact skin, we must have gloves on. There are various types of gloves. There are like sterile gloves, non-sterile gloves, and heavy-duty rubber gloves. So if some of you must wonder, why do we have non-sterile gloves? Then, there are a lot of activities we do related to patients, which we can do using non-sterile gloves and not use the more expensive sterile gloves. For example, for something like, if we have to handle a patient where we know the sterility is not important, so it's good to use a non-sterile pair of gloves, which are much cheaper. Then mask or respirators, and goggles and face sheets, especially when you expect a splash of blood or body fluid, which may occur in any of your mucosa. So if I were to ask you these questions, I know like you probably won't be able to answer them now, but we'll just have a sort of discussion. If you were using, suctioning oral secretions from a patient, what is the type of PPE would you wear? So keep in mind what exposure, might happen. So it could create aerosol. So you probably need to cover, yourself with, of course, goggles, face shield, in addition to glove and mask. If it was just transporting a patient in wheelchair, this keep this in mind that these are like COVID negative patient, because we're not talking COVID positive patient, because then you'll be wearing the complete PP. So in a normal healthcare scenario, if you were to just transport a patient in a wheelchair, what kind of PPE would you like to wear, or you would ask your nurse in charge to give you? Like, what do you think? I mean, I know like none of you are going to answer like this, but probably for transporting a patient in wheelchair, you don't really need any PPE in normal circumstances. Then responding to an emergency where blood is spurting, obviously you can expect a splash. So it'll be a good idea to have gloves and fluid resistant gown, but also in addition, goggle and face shield, so you protect your mucosa of eye. Then drawing blood from a vein, you actually need a pair of gloves, and that's it, nothing else. Irrigating a wound, of course, you can expect a splash, so you need goggles and face shield. Taking vital signs, if you have to take a patient's pulse or blood pressure, what PPE would you like to wear? So generally none is recommended. And in fact, OSHA does not even say you should use gloves while even giving an injection. So if you look at this and you try and sort of think that most of the time, are you sort of overprotected or underprotected? It could have given us some insight as to most of the residents, do you sort of underprotect yourself? Maybe you do. I don't know, maybe doctor, like, I mean, your in charges can tell, like, whether you all sort of overprotect yourself most of the time or underprotect. We do see everyone in a pair of gloves in hospital setting generally. So key points about PPE. You have to select PPE based on anticipated exposure, like we just discussed, and don them before contact with patients. And once you have worn it, do not do any adjustments or anything like touching your face while wearing PPE, and try not to spread contamination. Removal of PP, like doffing, has to be done very carefully, and then immediately hand hygiene has to be performed. Okay, so coming on to the respirator, there are a couple of things which I wanted to discuss, especially now with the COVID pandemic going on. It's a good idea to know this little bit about respirator. The three essentials that you must know about respirator are that it has to be put on correctly, and there are ways to put on PPE, which this mask, and I will be telling you how to put it on. But it has to rest. It has to cover your nose and come to under the chin. It has to fit snugly against your face. And there is something called a fit test for respirator, which one must undergo at least once in a year, and try and decide whether you are meant for a small or a large or a medium sized respirator. And generally, then that same size can continue for a year. So fit test is done like once a year. Then thirdly, your respirator must be able to capture 95% of particles. So it should be at least N95. Then going on to the user seal check. So I just discussed the fit test, which is just to see which size of respirator is best fit for your face shape and structure. But other one is user seal check. This has to be done every time you don a respirator. And this is done by, like you can see in the picture, you keep your fingers across your nasal bridge and you try and blow a little bit within the mask. And if there is a little bit of pressure buildup, then you know that it's fitting snugly, and it's a user seal check. We need that seal so that we are sure that nothing from outside or nothing from inside is sort of transferring. So this has to be done every time you wear a respirator. Then certain points on how to recognize counterfeit N95, which is because now, like in between, there was a lot of scarcity of N95 masks. So a lot of kind of stuff was being sold in the market, online or whatever. So you need to be aware as to what is a real N95 and what isn't. So N is for the non-oil resistant, and 95 I said should be the minimum, thing that it should stop 95% of particles from coming in. So N95 is the minimum requirement for respirator. So basically, if it's a counterfeit respirator, it would not have any markings on the face piece. Like normally we have, it's written N95, it's written a TC number, and a lot of other stuff is written in there. Also, if at all something is written, it would have a lot of typos and spelling errors. Like, sometimes when you buy a lot of fake products and you can make out from the type of print that's there on the product that this must be fake. So that's how it looks like on our fake N95. Then TC number will not be mentioned either on the mask or on the headband. Then any of the fancy masks can't be, the real N95, because none of them have any decorations or sequins or anything on that. So it will be plain. But yes, there are colors available. Then any N95 which claims it's approved for children can't be real, because NERSH hasn't approved any respirator for children. Lastly, very easy to spot. If it is a respirator with ear loops, then it has to be fake, because the original N95 only have headbands and not ear loops. So these are some of the points which can tell you whether you are using a real N95 or a counterfeit. Then another thing about the use of respirator, the normal recommendation, of course, is 195, one N95 mask for one patient interaction, and then you discard it. But in last few months, all of us have seen and noticed that yes, there was a crisis situation with N95. So one needed to have contingency plans, and then there were a lot of recommendations which came in from CDC as to what and how N95 can be used in cases of contingency and crisis. So that's when the talk about extended use of N95 and reuse of N95 came. So extended use can be up to 8 to 12 hours. This is a single use of N95 where you do not doff it. You're continuously wearing it for 8 or maybe up to 12 hours. Reuses, you sort of wear it once, then you doff it, store it in between, and then you again use it. So this kind of reuse is like CDC suggests that maximum 5 times you can don one N95. But both extended use and reuse will be limited by the fit, the local hygiene of that person, how much that mask is soiled or damaged, and the filtration performance. If one is not able to breathe properly, then probably the reuse has to be suspended and a fresh N95 has to be used. And both for reuse, it is must that you perform hand hygiene after you've touched the mask, because you have to treat the outside surface of the mask as contaminated. It's not like a brand new mask. And CDC even suggests that healthcare personnel can consider using a face shield or a face mask over the respirator to prevent it from being, becoming soiled, dirty, or reduce the contamination on the surface. Also, there are some suggestions on reprocessing or decontamination of N95 masks so that they can be reused with very minimal risk of self-contamination. So the recommended methods are moist heat and UV rays. And other alternatives, in case you run out of N95, then NIOSH approved N99, N100, or R95, R99, R100, and elastomerics are other alternatives which can be used in case one runs out of N95 mask. Okay. Anyone has sort of has anything to talk about N95 with valves? So you must have seen some people wearing them, N95 with valve. So here you have to sort of know respiratory protection versus source control. So if you have an N95 with expiratory valve, it is a valve through which whatever you breathe out comes out. This was just made keeping in mind that, people have a breathing comfort, and, there's sort of no buildup or suffocation within the mask. So this valve was built. But remember, this will not do any source control. If anyone who's infected or supposedly infected, they should not be using N95 with valve. It's good for respiratory protection. It can protect you from anyone else, if they are infected. But if you yourself are infected, you should not be wearing a N95 with valve. Then sequence for donning PPE. A lot of you who've done that can, sort of easily relate with this. First is hand hygiene, then you wear gown, followed by a mask or the respirator, depending on whatever procedure you're performing, goggles or face shield, and gloves. Now remember, we discussed transmission-based PPE. So depending on the procedure that you're performing, you might be wearing some of these and not wearing some of these, right? So always remember, your combination will affect the sequence. You may be doing a procedure where you don't need to wear goggles or face shield at all. So be practical and sort of get the right size, which is very important. Right size of gloves, right size of goggles, they are more important. The fit is more important. How to don a mask, I don't think I need to go into detail of this. Everyone knows this, but make sure it's like fitting comfortably. And there is a clip on the nose bridge, which you sort of make sure it fits snugly. How to wear a respirator, since all of you have had this hands-on thing going on for last so many months. Previously, I had to actually demonstrate it, but now I'm sure you all sort of have worn it maybe more than what we wear it. And how to don gloves, again, I think it's very clear to everyone how to wear gloves, especially the surgical residents would be really experts on this. Then do's and don'ts of glove use. Just wanted to talk about touch contamination. Very often what happens is we don sterile gloves for a procedure, and suddenly we have to adjust our glasses or our mobile phone rings, and we, without any hesitation, we touch all these things. So this is called touch contamination. So make sure once you're donning sterile gloves, you don't touch your face or adjust any other part of your PPE. You don't touch any environment surface, and you only perform the procedure for which you're wearing those sterile gloves. And in case you have touched any surface, then you must change your gloves. If anytime the gloves are torn, you must remove them, perform hand hygiene, and then don new gloves. So it is, the way you wear, you sort of, wear your gloves, and whatever you practice after that, it's going to influence how much of disease transmission you do in your healthcare setting. So if you're wearing gloves for a sterile procedure, make sure there is no touch contamination. Sequence of removing PPE, it is very important, because once the gloves or the mask or the gown, whatever is contaminated, you must remove it in a way that there are least opportunity for self-contamination. So you must remove the gloves first, followed by gown, then hand hygiene is performed, then face shield or goggle, then lastly mask or respirator, and again hand hygiene. I believe in current situation in COVID hospital duties, a lot of you are wearing double gloves or even 3 layers of gloves. In that case, the sequence changes a bit, like you take off first pair of glove first of all, then after removing gown, you take off second pair of glove, and the third pair of glove is taken off last. So, it depends on, how many layers of gloves you're wearing. You can sort of, the sequence of removing PPE. But the main idea is to limit opportunity for self-contamination. Okay, now it's very important to know contaminated and clean areas of PPE, what you can touch and what you cannot touch. It is fairly easy. Anything which is outside and anything which is in front, when you're facing the patient, will be contaminated. And anything which is inside, meaning the inside surface of the inside of the glove, inside surface of the gown, everything inside will be clean, and anything on the back side will also be clean. So all your ties on the head and the gown ties on the back will also be clean. So this is important to know, because while doffing, you know which areas can be touched and which areas, like how you handle them so that you don't contaminate yourself. So removing gloves, it's very clear from the picture how you and why you have to know how to remove gloves so that you don't contaminate your skin or the skin of the hand. So basically you grasp the outside edge of the glove and then you just peel it off and hold it in the other hand. So the striped glove is the inside surface. Then you use the your finger is sterile. You put it inside the other glove and then again peel it off, and everything is packed, like one glove is packed inside the second glove, and then you discard them. And where you discard them, gloves go to red bin because they are plastic. There's another method of doffing gloves, which is beak method, just indicated here. Basically, whichever method you use, just have to make sure you don't contaminate your hands. And then everything, all the gloves are rolled and they are like in a way that inside surfaces become outside. Okay, removing mask, because the back and the ties are relatively clean area. So with after you've taken off your gloves, you can use your hands to open up the ties. For removing respirator, of course, you take off the lower band first and then upper band, and your respirator comes off. Okay, so much about PPE. Little bit on cough etiquettes. So it's a very good idea to cover your nose and mouth if one is coughing or sneezing. And in case none is available, then in the crook of the elbow, you must cough or sneeze. And this is one information which you must pass on to all your, all the staff which works with you or under you, so that, they don't spread whatever bacteria or virus while they're coughing or sneezing. And it's a good idea to hand hygiene after you have done this. To contain respiratory spread, it's good to have posters or visual alerts at the entrance, so that if any patient is suffering from any of these, upper respiratory symptom and is coughing or sneezing, they can be asked to wear mask and wait in an area where they are like at a little distance from other patients. And also there should be hand rub provided to them, and bins should be pedal operated, so that every time they have to throw tissue or something, they don't have to touch the bin. Handling sharps, just very few points which one must keep in mind. Never bend a needle or remove any needle using your hands. Use a needle cutter. Straight away put the syringe in there, the needle will be removed. And avoid recapping needle. If you have to, then you must use the single hand scoop technique. Then all the sharps, the needle, IV cannulae, everything metallic has to go in a white puncture proof container, and broken glass ampules go into the blue container. And never overfill these sharp container. Only while they're 2/3 filled, they should be removed and another container should be used. So remember, all the metallic sharps go into white or the translucent container, and the glass, the broken glass, goes into blue container. Managing a spill. Very often, you are sort of collecting a sample, maybe a blood sample or any other biological fluid, and someone might drop that vial. So how do you manage that spill, and what do you tell, your staff how to do that? So unless you cannot sort of tell them what to do about it. So first of all, this is one condition in which you can wear non-sterile gloves and other PPE. You can wear a gown and goggles, and isolate that area. Put some, maybe chairs or table around that area so that people don't walk around that area. Then first of all, use a pan and a brush, so that if there are any sharps, any broken test tube glass or anything, that needs to be picked up and put it in the blue box because it's a broken glass. Then the entire body fluid, whatever is there on the floor, maybe the blood, it has to be soaked in disposable towels. If you don't have disposable towel, newspaper is the best thing. You put some newspaper on it, let it soak the entire body fluid, and then you discard it in the yellow bag. Then put Fresh 1:10 diluted bleach and cover the entire area which had the spill. Let it sit for 20 minutes and again use the disposable towel to clean the area. So this is an example just how it is done. Now, briefly on biomedical waste management, the black bin is the easiest to remember. It has, the non-infectious waste. So whatever paper or the, food, leftover glasses, plates or whatever, everything goes in the black bin. Yellow bin has everything which has, human tissue, any swabs, cottons, bandages, linen, anything contaminated with human fluid or blood. Whereas red bag has anything which is plastic or rubber, and it goes into red bin. So remember, yellow, black, and red, the major, three types of sort of biomedical waste. And just wanted to highlight a few things in this yellow, red, and white bins. In yellow, other than the anatomical waste and the cotton or the linen and the soil dressing, also go in expired or discarded medicines. And the entire yellow bin content, it goes in for incineration. It is burnt. For red bin, we've discussed it takes all the plastic and the rubber things. So when you're discarding syringes, make sure the needles don't go into red bag. Needles are supposed to go in the puncture-proof container. And the red bag content is always sent for autoclaving and then maybe for recycling or sent to landfill. White bin, we've already discussed. It's for metallic sharps. So it could be needles or scalpel blades or anything, metallic sharps. And blue is for glassware, but also for metallic body implants. So this is the basic category of waste. There's a lot more to it, so you can read up, more details if you want to know more and how it is disposed. All the yellow bin waste goes in for incineration. That is, it's burnt and the ashes are sent for landfilling. Most of the red bin stuff is first autoclaved so that it becomes non-infected, and then it can go for either recycling, shredding, or whatever. So if I were to ask you, where do these go? Expired medicine. So I hope you all know this goes into yellow bin. A syringe, the first it's put in the needle cutter. The needle stays there, and then they go into the puncture-proof white container, and the syringe, the plastic part, goes into the red bin. This goes into red, and this goes into yellow. Okay, so that's about it. And this symbol that you see here, this is the biohazard symbol. I hope you all know that this has 4 circles. And each circle denotes a thing about infection. So like there is an agent which needs, the agent is the infectious agent. It needs to have a host, it needs to have a source, and it needs to have a transmission method. So these 4 are the principle of, how infections happen. So there are 4 circles denoting these 4. Thank you so much.